The second most abundant or common type of cell in the blood is known as the white blood cell, aka the leukocyte. So in this video, we're going to be looking at the features, the types, and the functions of these different types of white blood cells. When something harmful gets into the body, we want to have a way to get rid of it, right? Now, the white blood cells play an important role in the body defense mechanism. Now, looking at the characteristic or features of the white blood cell, the first and most important is that the white blood cells are complete cells. They are complete cells. Now, this means that unlike the red blood cell that lack the nucleus and other cellular organelles, the white blood cell actually contains the nucleus and other organelles. Okay, so the white blood cells are actually complete cells. Now, the second characteristics or another characteristics of the white blood cell is that they are short-lived. They are short-lived. Now, unlike the red blood cell, the white blood cell only live for hours, maybe 1 or 2 hours, and even minutes. Now, this is depending on the type of infection it is trying to get rid of. Okay, so unlike the red blood cell that live for about 120 days, the white blood cell lives for a very short period of time. So it has a shorter lifespan. Okay, now another characteristics of the white blood cell is that as compared to the red blood cells, they are fewer in number. They are fewer in number. Okay, so let's assume we have 2 microliter of blood. 2 microliter of blood. And 2 microliter of blood can contain about 10 million RBCs. Okay, about 10 million RBCs. Now, in this same amount of blood, you would only have about 10,000 to 20,000 WBCs, which are white blood cells. So, as compared to the red blood cells, the white blood cells are fewer in number. Okay. Now, the last characteristic I'm going to talk about is that the white blood cell, they do not actually spend a lot of time in the blood vessels. So what they do is that when they develop, they look for a way to get through to the tissues. So they leave the blood vessels and pass through the openings of the cells, the cell lining of the blood vessel, this lining of the blood vessel, and get into the tissue. And that mechanism is known as the epidesis. The epidesis. Okay, so that is the mechanism. Now, when it moves from the blood vessels to the tissues, now it assumes a particular form, which I'm going to talk about in subsequent teachings. Okay, so these are the major, or I would say general characteristics of the white blood cell. Looking at the type of white blood cell, the white blood cell is divided into 2 main categories. We have the granulocytes and the agranulocytes. Okay, now this distinction is as a result of the presence or absence of granules. Okay, so now granules are actually vesicles in the cell. Now they have an important function, which I'm going to talk about later. Now, this division is based on the presence or absence of granules. So like the name implies here, the granulocytes are white blood cells that contains granules. The agranulocytes are white blood cells that do not contain granules. Okay, so that is the basis by which these differences or these categories were made. Now, basically, there are 5 types of white blood cells, right? Now, 3 of which are granulocytes and 2 of which are agranulocytes. Now, the granulocytes or the granular white blood cells are the eosinophil, the neutrophil, and the basophil. These are the 3 white blood cells under the granulocytes. That means they contain granule. Now, coming over to this area, the types of white blood cells that do not contain granules are monocyte and lymphocytes. Right? So we're going to be talking about the characteristics of these cells one after the other. Now, looking at the neutrophil. So the neutrophil is the most abundant type of white blood cell. It's the most abundant type of white blood cell. Now, one of the characteristics of the neutrophil is that it is multi-lobed. That means it can have up to 2 to 5 lobes depending on the time it has lived, okay, depending on its maturity. Now, when I talk about maturity, do not think that the white blood cell actually live for a longer time. Even though it has lived for 1-2 hours, these multi-lobed nucleus can actually still develop, okay? So they have multi-lobe nucleus. Now, another characteristics of the neutrophil is that the neutrophil, their granules actually are clearer. Granules are clearer when stained with neutral stain or dye. Okay, so when you use a neutral stain or a neutral dye to stain the cell, the granules, the contrast of the granules is increased. So you can see the granules better when you stain it with a neutral stain, hence the name neutrophil. Okay, so the granules are seen when it is stained with the neutral stain. Now, another information about the neutrophil is that in function, they actually help to phagocytize bacteria. So they phagocytize bacteria cell. That is their major function. Okay, they engulf. Now, phagocytosis is an engulfment. So they engulf bacteria. Okay, now you know that when bacteria get into the body, one of the major things it releases is a toxin called the cytokines. Okay, now when the neutrophil senses bacteria and the toxin it has released in the body, what it does is that it goes to the bacterial cells and phagocytize the cell. Now, when it does that, the granules, which contains an enzyme called the lysozyme, helps to break down the bacterial cell wall. Okay, you know the bacterial cell wall is made up of peptidoglycan. Okay, so the lysozyme inside the granules, because the granules are actually vesicles that contain the enzyme lysozyme. So that lysozymes break down the peptidoglycan cell wall of or cell membrane of the bacteria. Okay, so that is one of the major functions of the neutrophil. Another type of the white blood cell we have is the eosinophil. Now, the eosinophil is actually called eosinophil because the contrast is better when it is stained with an acidic dye. Okay, so the granules shows better when it is stained with an acidic dye known as eosine. Okay, so this is an acidic dye that stains the eosinophil and increases the contrast. Okay, so that is that. Now, another feature of the eosinophil is that they are bilobed. They are bilobed. Okay, so the nucleus are divided into two. Okay, so you can have structures like this. They are bilobed nucleus. Okay, so that is that. Now for the function of eosinophil. Now eosinophil function majorly in fighting against parasitic worm. Parasitic worms. That's their specialty. They specialize in fighting against parasitic worms. And they also do numerous functions, but this is the basic function of the eosinophil. Okay, so that's that about the eosinophil. For the basophils are the fewest. That means they're the less common. They're the less common type of white blood cell. They're the less common leukocyte we have. Now, when the basophil is stained with basic dye, the granules shows better. Okay, so when you stain the basophils with basic dye, the granules shows better. Hence the name basophil. Basic dye, basophil. Okay, so that is that. Now, another feature of the basophil is that looking at the functions. Now, they function in releasing or the release of histamine. Now, this is very important in local inflammatory responses. It's very important. The histamine plays a major role in local inflammatory responses. Okay, so that is that about the basophil. Now, looking at the lymphocytes. The lymphocyte is actually a granulocyte. Okay, that means it doesn't have the granules. So we've talked about the 3 granulocytes, and now we are talking about the 2 agranulocytes. And the first is the lymphocyte. Now, talking about the lymphocyte, there are actually 3 basic types of the lymphocytes. We have the natural killers. Now, this is also known as the NK cells. We have the B cells, and we have the T cells. Now, all these, they act differently. Okay, now the natural killer, how it acts. The natural killer actually kills the cell with the virus inside. So let's assume that this is a cell that has a virus inside, maybe a bacteriophage inside. Okay, now one thing you should know is that when viruses actually infect a cell, what happens is that it leaves a precursor on the surface of the cell. So when these when the NK cells notices that this particular cell is infected with a virus, what it does is that it comes and attacks the whole cell. It kills the cell and the virus inside the cell. So it is a natural killer. Now for the B and T cells, now these particular ones, these particular lymphocytes, they target specific infections or specific organisms. Their target is specific. Their target is specific, okay? So they have specific antigens they target. Now, unlike natural killer that kills the cell and the virus inside the cell, these B and T cells, they target the specific antigens, okay? Now, another thing you should know here is that this is just the idea of vaccination. And that is because the B and T cells are actually memory cells. They are memory cells. That means if they attack a particular antigen, it is stored in their memory that they need to be ready when that particular antigen or that particular foreign body comes into the body again. Okay, so this is the idea by which vaccine is built on. Okay, so during vaccination, what is inside your body, what is inserted or put inside your body is the microorganism or the foreign body. Now when these cells senses the entrance of a foreign substance, what it does is that it begins to target the specific antigens, and by targeting the specific antigens, it begins to develop resistance to that particular. So whenever the antigen shows up again, it doesn't have any effect on you because the B and the T cells have already mastered the act of attacking the antigens. So that is that about the lymphocytes. Lastly, looking at the monocyte. The monocyte is one of the agranulocytes. That means they do not have granules. Now, the major characteristics we often talk about in studying the monocyte is that it has a kidney-shaped nucleus. It has a kidney-shaped nucleus. Okay, so the nucleus is a bean or kidney shaped. Okay, so this is one of the major features. When you see this particular structure, you just know that it is a monocyte. Now, another basic feature of the monocyte is that when it leaves the bloodstream, like I talked about the epidesis, that white blood cell can actually leave the bloodstream to the tissue. Now, when the monocyte leaves the bloodstream and gets to the tissue, it becomes macrophages. Okay, it becomes macrophages. And what's the function of the macrophages? They phagocytize bacteria. They phagocytize bacteria. That means they attack bacteria by phagocytosis, that is engulfment mechanism. So if we have a bacterial cell here, and there is a macrophage, what it does is that it goes and begins to engulf this bacteria. Now the engulfment continues until this point meets with this point, and the bacterial cell is now inside the monocyte. Okay, so that is how the monocyte works. That's how the monocyte works. Its function is phagocytosis. Okay, it phagocytizes bacteria. So these are the types of white blood cells. Okay, so I believe this video was helpful and interesting as well. So thank you for watching. And please do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so. Thank you very much and see you in my next video.